Hello there. Welcome to this episode of Force Ghost Conversations. This is your host, Anthony King, and this week I'm joined by Caitlin and Charlotte from Skytalkers to discuss our experiences with and the legacy of the Phantom Menace in honor of its 25th anniversary. If you're a fan of the podcast and would like to consider pledging your support, there will be a link in the episode description for you to check out the various tiers offered. Also, please be sure to check out our TeePublic store to buy some Force Ghost Conversations merchandise. And without further ado, it's time to gather around the campfire for some Force Ghost Conversations. Hey everyone, welcome back to Force Ghost Conversations. And boy, we have had a trilogy of fantastic episodes in honor of the Phantom Menace, celebrating its legacy, looking towards the future, but also the here and now, living in the moments, living in the living force, as Qui-Gon would say. And we are celebrating the anniversary, the 25th anniversary of the Phantom Menace here on the podcast. And I'm so thrilled to round out our conversations. 2 weeks ago, we had Silver from Star Wars Thrifting on. Last week, we had Dan Z from Coffee with Kenobi on. And this week, we have both Charlotte and Caitlin from Skytalkers on the podcast. And I'm thrilled to have both of them on the show as prequel kids to chat about their experiences with the Phantom Menace. And it's a lot of fun. So this is a pre-recorded episode, of course, as you know. Whatever news has come out over the past week, and frankly, last couple of weeks at this point, I don't know. So we'll cover all that stuff in June when we're back on a weekly release schedule that we are recording week to week rather than all these pre-recordings that I'm doing. So thank you for your patience and understanding with that. Let's just get into it here. I want you all to listen to this incredible episode celebrating the Phantom Menace. So thank you all for tuning into this episode. And on the other side of this short break, we will have our conversation with Charlotte and Caitlin on the Phantom Menace 25th anniversary, its legacy, our experiences, all the fun. It's coming your way right now. All right, everybody, welcome back to Force Ghost Conversations. And it is still Phantom Menace month here on the podcast. We are talking all things Phantom Menace in honor of its 25th anniversary this year. And we've had Silver from Star Wars Thrifting on the show. We've had Dan Z from Coffee with Kenobi. And of course, rounding out the Phantom Menace 25th anniversary celebration month that we've been doing here, I am thrilled to welcome back both hosts of Skytalkers to the show. And welcome back to the show, first off, Caitlin, but also a first-time guest on the show, Charlotte. So let's start. Caitlin, how are you doing? Welcome back to the podcast.
I'm good. Thank you so much for having us. Well, having me on again, but having Charlotte on too. It was so much fun talking about Ahsoka, I guess a couple months ago now. So I'm really excited to be back talking about the Phantom Menace.
Amazing. And Charlotte, welcome back. Welcome to the podcast, first and foremost. How are you doing? And thanks for being on the show.
So happy to be here. I love the Phantom Menace, so I'm really excited to talk about it. And there's so much to talk about, really.
Absolutely. And, I'm thrilled to get your thoughts on this film, especially. We are prequel kids. We are fans of the prequels. So I feel like this is right in the wheelhouse for all of us to have a wonderful and candid discussion about this movie. And, frankly, I want to go back to the beginning. So, Charlotte, I'm going to throw this first question to start with you right here. So, what are your first memories of watching this film? Was it in 1999? Was it perhaps later? Maybe you have minimal memories of it in 1999. But tell us, where does your beginning with this movie start?
So my beginning with this is actually, I think, pretty funny. So I have been, okay, The Phantom Menace was the first Star Wars movie I ever saw in the movie theater. I was 5 years old, and I was very disturbed by the sounds of the pod racer where my parents had to carry me out. It's the funniest thing ever because now we have a Star Wars podcast. I had to be carried out of a Star Wars movie. And yeah, and I remember that because it was like the only one that ever happened in. But I think that we got tickets and we were in the front row. It was just a little overstimulating for a 5-year-old. And it did not really land with me. And it's just hilarious because it definitely lands now. 25 years later, and it landed like honestly even 5 years later. I think I was not in the headspace to receive that information. and, and it was so that was my origin story with the Phantom Menace, which is so funny. I think it's the most ironic thing, honestly.
This is incredible. I mean, like, I've been blown away with the various stories that people have been sharing about this movie over time, and this is up there with
It's
just
a good
like
one. It's a good one.
I can understand the feelings of being like 5 years old and just being so overwhelmed, right? I mean, the podcast itself, the pod race is so loud, right? It's a loud sequence. I mean, the movie
So
is scary itself in many ways. I mean, we'll get to that in a little bit here with my story about my first time watching this movie. So, you know, that's a great place to start with this movie. Is getting taken out of the theater.
I mean, the fact that it
Didn't
was
even
all
make it through.
the pod race itself, I mean, zero John Williams music, just absolutely loud engines. It just was rattling the seats. I couldn't handle it
my
as a
God.
5-year-old. Now as an adult, I'm like, this was such a choice. I love that they did this.
Make
It was
it
the best
louder.
ever. Yeah, it was like literally make it louder, like raise the volume. But yeah, so funny.
Wow. I'm left speechless on a podcast already. We're off to a great start, everybody. Caitlin, what are your first memories of this movie?
We maybe should have ended with Charlotte because hers is way more exciting. Mine is not nearly as exciting. I did not grow up with Star Wars, so I actually saw the Phantom Menace for the first time with Charlotte. So I would have been
Amazing.
12 or 13. Yeah, when I saw it for the first time. I think it was at my house that we watched the Phantom Menace. Because we would flip back and forth when I was first going through the Star Wars movies between my house and Charlotte's house. But I think Phantom Menace was at my house. That would have been in my basement with the surround sound all turned up. And I think I was just very lost at what was going on. Like, where are all these people going? What is happening? But the thing is, even though I wasn't a Star Wars kid, like when Phantom Menace was coming out, I do remember all of the promotional materials for it. Like, I very clearly remember like the Burger King toys, like seeing those and wondering like what all that was about. And I remember kids having like Star Wars Lego sets and stuff like that that were at school and things. So I really remember the promo for it, even though I wasn't watching Star Wars at the time, which I always think is kind of a fun tidbit.
Caitlin, you should mention like if you mentioned this, sorry, but it was your first Star Wars. Like we started there.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I was going to ask a follow-up if you watched the originals first and then went back, or maybe you did a different order of viewing, but you started episode one. This is the beginning.
Yeah.
In 2005, 2006, it was very much George Lucas wanted you to watch it from 1 to 6.
Yes,
and
exactly.
I think that there's a lot of debate now about where to enter Star Wars, but that debate to me was just two-sided. George Lucas's way or the way that people sometimes do it. And as like a new fan really that came like really into fandom with Revenge of the Sith, I was like, I have to introduce people to Star Wars the way in the complete saga. We have the
and it was
saga.
closer. It meant fewer movies to get through to get to Revenge of the Sith for you. We should also say that.
True. Yeah.
There are two sides.
We all stand Revenge of the Sith here.
Exactly.
But the Phantom Menace would actually end up being the first Star Wars movie that I saw in theaters too, because incidentally they did the re-release or showing of it when I was in college.
Right. Yeah.
And I went
the 3D.
The 3D. I went to a midnight showing in my town in college with a friend, and there were like 6 other people, and I definitely thought there were going to be a lot of people. And there were not. My theater was not packed at all. I think there was maybe 10 of us in the entire theater, but it was really fun. And it did end up being my first Star Wars movie in theaters, which is kind of cool.
I love this. This is a first of first in many ways, right? I mean, you don't have to be 3, 4, 5 years old and watch your first Star Wars film. And I love that this is kind of in a way, your entry point into Star Wars, Caitlin. Like, we talk, and a lot of people have different entry points into Star Wars, especially nowadays. You could watch maybe The Acolyte's going to be your first thing coming up, and you've never watched a Star Wars before. But for you were like, let's do it. And Charlotte, you were like, you must watch this. We're getting to Revenge of the Sith. We're doing this. And, all these years later, a podcast was spawned out of that.
Right.
Which I think is so cool. So for me, just so that we're all on the same page here of like our entry points for this movie, I was 4 on opening night when this movie came out, and I have almost absolutely no memory of seeing the movie in the theaters. So when it comes out in a couple weeks here at the time of this recording, and seeing the film will basically be the first time that I can actually recollect seeing the Phantom Menace on the big screen. I have faint glimpses of aspects of this movie. So Charlotte, you were taken out of the theater because you were scared of the pod race, whereas I was scared to death of Maul. That was nightmare fuel for me back as a kid. And
sense.
I also just like
he's the devil.
Absolutely, yeah. And Insidious himself was very much a devious figure. The hologram itself and him saying like, "I will make it legal," was definitely like, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? This is a bad guy. I shouldn't be here. This is scary.
Mm-hmm.
It was that's my entry point too for this movie. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed. I am scared. And then of course Attack of the Clones comes out, and I'm a little older then, so I can handle things a bit more. I will say too, I watched the original trilogy a lot as a kid, and I watched these Attack of the Clones, Phantom Menace, and then it was around 2004 that I had a revelation in some way where I didn't think that they were connected at all. I thought they were two different stories. I thought that this was old Star Wars and new Star Wars over here. And at no point did I think that they cross-connected at all, until my uncle had to sit me down one day and was basically like, yes, that little kid becomes that evil big guy in these other movies. I'm like, no, that's impossible. Yoda just happens to be in both. They're not real. They're not connected at all. So I had to have a bit of counseling myself in order to figure out that this is actually one big grand story here, which I think is pretty fun story now that we're 25 years after the point at this effort here. And it's hard to believe that 25 years have honestly passed when it comes to this movie. And it feels like last year that Celebration Chicago happened, but that's 5 years now at this point. We were celebrating the 20th anniversary of that. I believe you both were at Celebration Chicago. Am I not mistaken? Were you both in the Celebration panel?
Oh yeah,
we were.
Oh yeah, incredible. So you got to be in the room with all the Ahmad Best and seeing all the cast and crew behind the scenes. Oh, amazing.
It was great.
I rewatched
really
that
fun.
in preparation for this podcast. I'm like, I still get goosebumps just by thinking about it. So I can only imagine what the room was like. It must have been so cool of an incredible atmosphere to begin with.
Absolutely. The room was electric. People were really, really excited. The applause that they gave Ahmed Best was so awesome. I think there was some palpable energy of thinking George Lucas might show up too. And then we got a video message from him where he was clearly stuck somewhere. I don't know. I have theories in which he couldn't fly due to the blizzard that occurred the day before. But I feel like I learned so much in that panel, which I highly recommend if anyone's listening who hasn't watched it. It's on YouTube. You should definitely watch it. There's definitely like hidden figures I didn't know about who worked on the Phantom Menace, and just the very fact that the Phantom Menace has less digital effects than the original trilogy like always gets me, because it's just not what people think. And that panel really highlighted that. It's sort of like what I took away from that panel, honestly, and the fact that there was just so many fans of it and the prequel generation. So cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, that George video itself is like a great delight. I don't know
so
what
funny.
it is. It is just,
it's so weird.
It's beautiful. I can't even comprehend it.
I know.
I know.
There's no reason to comprehend it. You could just watch it and just enjoy.
Accept it. That was kind of the feeling in the panel, I think. But yeah, I remember they played like a bunch of 90s music before the panel started too, when we were all waiting. It was really good vibes the whole time, honestly. People were so excited for that panel. It was really good.
Oh, take me back to 1999. What a wild time to be alive. What a wild time.
Maybe we would actually enjoy the Phantom Menace in the theaters if they could bring me back to 1999.
It's true. Everyone's just blasting some Matchbox 20 on the way there. Hey.
Oh my God, you're speaking my language.
Charlotte loves Matchbox 20.
So hey, wonderful band. Rob Thomas is incredible. Smooth was #1 at the time. This is
just like
Take me
that
back.
era of Matchbox 20, that was like the best. Slide, yeah. Anyway.
We're in good company here to have this conversation. I knew we were gonna have a great combo, folks. I knew you were in for something today. So it's been 25 years now, and honestly, Caitlin, it's kind of been only 20 years for you.
Yeah.
So, starting with you here, how have your feelings evolved or changed with this movie over the last 20 years per se? From your first viewing to now, how's the evolution gone?
I feel like with the Phantom Menace, it's kind of continually going up, my appreciation for the movie, because I think I mentioned this, but the first couple times I watched it, I just really, honestly, I didn't get it. It really stood out to me among all of the other Star Wars films, right? Like Anakin is so young in it, and then we have a big time jump, and we don't have kind of the similar time jump in the original trilogy. So it just always stood out to me as kind of an outlier in the whole saga. But I think as I got older and starting to think about the movies more critically and like actually analyzing the story that was happening, I feel like I just gained a much bigger appreciation for the choices that George made to start Anakin's story the way that he did in the Phantom Menace with, a really young Anakin Skywalker. And I definitely didn't appreciate that or really understand that choice when I was younger. But I think, the past 20 years, not 25, it's just there's so much to learn about the Phantom Menace and like George's filmmaking process. And I think that's what's changed for me the most is just I like it a lot more now, and I like learning about the production of that film and kind of George's headspace and even honestly the culture around the Phantom Menace coming out, the hype for it. I think it's so fun. It's so fun to hear people's stories about waiting for it to come out, all the promotional material. It's kind of an insane period.
I agree. George was so bold with this movie in many ways, right? Like,
Mhm.
what a concept to be like. He didn't have to touch the to add more stories to Star Wars. If he would have just stopped with the original trilogy, everyone would still love it. Like, there would be no quarrels about it. It would be great. And then to add on a prequel at that too, to explain how we got to this point here and to tell a completely different story in many ways than what people were expecting. I mean, that's so bold. And I love it. We talked a little bit about the panel, and one of the big takeaways is Doug Chang in that panel being like, George sat me down and was like, everything that you think and about Star Wars, just put it out of your mind right now. Like, we're starting fresh as a blank canvas. We're starting over again. We're reinventing the wheel in a certain way. And I think that comes across in the production of this movie and how the movie is portrayed, the execution of it. It's all right there in the formula that is the Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Charlotte, how has the film changed for you over the last 25 years?
I feel like I've always been okay. So while I had the experience that I did of seeing the movie when I was 5 years old, I think we can put that out of our mind. And when
you've had the biggest journey of all of us here. You actually got to sit through it.
When I was older and then I got really into Star Wars, my mom introduced me to the originals, and then I really fell in love with the prequels. I always liked the Phantom Menace. It was probably the Revenge of the Sith is my favorite prequel, but I've been a staunch defender and lover of the prequels my whole life. Like, I think Caitlin can attest to that, ever since I was a Star Wars fan. Right. And I think the boldness that we were just speaking to, I was aware of that when I was younger and was sort of very much like devil's advocate in any sort of argument about any of these things. And as someone who my favorite character is Padme, and I love her character in this movie. And I feel like that always kept me coming back to the Phantom Menace. And just like Caitlin said, my love for it and my appreciation for it has just increased, honestly. Like, we started at a good place and it's just increased, honestly, in terms of what's to love about it and learning more about it. I think there's something really special about this movie, and that there's so much behind the scenes footage also, and just like the best documentary ever about, honestly, action movie making, the beginning. And I feel like the beginning just really shed so much light into the choices that were being made, what was on the line, and everything. It makes me like the movie so much more. And watching that early on, I think, was really helpful in understanding and defending. I don't even want to start in a place of defense, honestly, in terms of this conversation, but I really feel like it gave me new perspective of it that I've carried with me for a really long time.
Yeah, agreed. Like I will say the DVD, it being released on DVD, one of the first DVDs, frankly, if I can remember correctly, too, and having the plethora of space for all the special features, right? The
Yeah.
documentaries, the behind the scenes footage, right? I don't know if they did that before for a movie, but with the intent of creating a whole separate disc to release all this information, that was kind of almost revolutionary at the time, too. And as Star Wars fans, now we get to relish in the coolness of the behind the scenes stuff, right? I think you were all at, obviously you were there, you had a panel, so you were at Celebration Anaheim. Perhaps you saw the gentleman that was cosplaying as Liam Neeson in the Tunisia desert, wearing the funky umbrella hat and all of that, walking around the Anaheim Convention Center, right? It's like, that's our generation's Pink Shorts guy, right? Like,
Yeah,
we know all the
exactly.
cool stuff from the behind the scenes of
Yes.
this movie.
I love that comparison. That just like
that's so funny.
that was great. That was great.
But and I hate to say it too, like, we did have to defend this movie, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't think the prequels are looked upon in such a favorable light all these years later if it weren't for fans like the three of us saying, like, no, I actually like that movie. I like these movies. They're pretty good. If you sit down and actually watch them and take the time to dissect them and look through the themes that are there, get on the same page with what George was saying here, right? There's a story to be told here that he obviously wanted us to get to grasp. And I think that it's all right there for us. And a lot of people were bullied for liking the prequels. I remember being a kid, and I didn't, the phrase prequel lover wasn't really a thing at the time, or a prequelist, as other people have coined the phrase. So I would say I'm a sagaist when people are like, oh, you like Star Wars?
Yes.
And they're like, how do you like, you must not like these prequel films that just come out. And I was like, no, I'm a sagaist. I would just like slyly put that phrase out there to tell people, like, no, I like 1 through 6 at the time. Now, of course, I've had to expand that over the years, but as I've gotten older, and I've been like, no, I'm putting my feet down. The Phantom Menace rocks. Attack of the Clones is incredible. You should see the crowd at the Anaheim Convention Center that's celebrating the Attack of the Clones for its 20th anniversary. We exist.
Yeah,
we exist,
totally.
Everybody.
There's so many of us.
It's just so great how there's many of us. We are so
There's
few.
dozen.
There are dozens.
There's so many.
And again, I remember when the 2013 re-release came out in 3D, and Caitlin too. I think I don't actually remember seeing. I think it was away out of the country, and it only lasted for like a week at that time or something like that, and it was quickly gone. But I also remember it not being heavily attended either at the same regards. So
I went in Worcester, Massachusetts, and it was a sold out show. It
amazing.
was a great night.
That's perfect. I'm so happy. Yeah,
I've heard your story and Caitlin's story several times, people being like, there was not a lot of people there, but in the second largest New England city, it was pretty well attended, I have to say.
Perfect.
I guess my small college town isn't a good snapshot of the country, but
no, I think it should be. That's the thing. It should be, and it's sad, but I offer that there were people who were there. Okay.
The record has been shown that there were people at Worcester, Massachusetts on opening night for the 3D re-release.
Exactly.
But I think, to that point though, I think that this re-release for the 25th anniversary is definitely a bit more anticipated perhaps than that one. I know people have been getting their tickets long in advance. I think that the healing over the last 25 years of people respecting the prequels a lot more has come to the forefront, and thankfully the film is getting its due perhaps more than ever this year with the celebration of its re-release and all that. So I'm glad to hear that your journeys have only continued to love it more as time has gone on, and that you just keep diving more into the understanding of this movie and becoming students of it in a way, rather than just accepting it at face value and going, oh, that's a fun popcorn movie. But no, you're like, I gotta find out what really was going on behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
What was George doing here? What was he picking his brain on in this one?
Yeah, he was suffering.
So this movie really introduced. he was doing a lot.
He's gone through a lot.
George had something to say. Yeah,
I have to say, I went through a lot of old footage recently because I was making a TikTok video, and George, right before this movie came out, was so content. He was like the happiest we've ever seen him, and he was so like excited to release the movie, which I'm
He
very
was.
happy for him because I feel like that never happened again, nor did it happen before. So it
Probably
was
true. That's
I'm
true.
Yep.
glad he had this experience.
I love the interviews leading up to this movie. Like that was again to that point. You're right. I never thought of it that way, but I was like, yeah, there's something different about this George. I can't put my finger on it, but he is
Mhm,
in a way the happiest he's ever been. Yeah.
mhm. Yeah,
I
he
wonder
was
if it's
like
like having his kids on set and just getting the band
yeah,
back together in some way. Just
totally.
feeling unoverwhelmed by like even with the original trilogy, still felt, in my opinion, a little overwhelmed by the studio system, perhaps. And now he's like, I can do whatever I want, and people will go see it in the theater, so I can put my message out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah, it came across well, in my opinion.
Yep.
So this movie introduced a plethora of new characters into the Star Wars universe. Padme Amidala, Jar Jar Binks, Qui-Gon Jinn, Darth Maul, Shmi Skywalker, maybe even the master of exposition himself, Rick Ali, just to name a few. So which of these new characters are standouts for you and why? And Caitlin, we'll go with you for this first one here.
Oh, I mean, I don't want to steal Padme from Charlotte, but she's definitely a standout, I think, in this film,
Go
and
ahead.
definitely someone.
We,
Okay,
we
great.
can talk all about Padme in this
I,
episode. Yeah.
I think she's a standout in this film. She was definitely someone I remember like latching onto the first couple times I was watching it. Of like, all right, let me follow her story. And I think that the Queen in Disguise is such
Hmm.
a fun plot point, and the reveal is, I think, so iconic when she reveals herself as Queen,
I love
and
it.
everyone else
Yeah.
around her is like, oh. Oh, okay. That's who we've been with this whole time. I love that moment. That's probably
Fooled
one of
me.
my favorite
I'll tell you
moments.
that.
Yeah, I think it's so great. But then I also think just learning about like Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's relationship, I think is one that I reflect on a lot more now. I think, now that we have
Hmm.
so many more like master and apprentice relationships to compare to theirs, even stuff like Tales of the Jedi, where we get a little bit of Qui-Gon in that. And then of course we saw him in Obi-Wan
Yeah.
Kenobi. I think he's a much more he's such a fascinating character, and his time in the Phantom Menace sadly cut short in the saga as a whole, but he's an
Some
interesting
might say
one.
cut in half.
I wasn't going to, but you did.
Someone had to go
He's
there.
uh he's definitely a character that I reflect on a lot more and think about more than I did, when I was, 13, 14, 15. I think there's still a lot more to tell about Qui-Gon Jinn.
I agree. I think I might be going on a limb here, but over the last couple of weeks talking about this movie, I think Qui-Gon may be the quintessential definition when we talk about a perfect Jedi, right?
Mhm.
I think he may be fitting that bill and definition the best. I don't know if maybe you two would say something to that degree or put him up in that echelon, but I think that this man just exhibits the kindness, the compassion, the living in the moment, the willing to do what must be done that a Jedi should have been doing at that time.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you bring this up, actually. I do agree with you, and I think that Qui-Gon is probably the ideal Jedi, and I always think about what the story would have looked
What
like
could have
if
been.
yeah, if
Mm.
Anakin could have been taught by him. Um, I honestly have gone through Caitlin knows this, like, we both have gone through a lot of, like, peaks and valleys, I think, with
Mhm.
our relationship with the character of Qui-Gon Jinn. I
Mm.
think for us, we were like, "Why is he always thinking that he knows better than Padme?" and things like
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, he does.
Um, but I think I've just gone through a journey, I think, and I'm with you with the fact that he's the ideal Jedi. I also recently read that George Lucas thinks of himself closely to Qui-Gon Jinn,
Interesting.
and
Oh
that kind
yeah.
of blew my mind a little bit. Yeah, and I am still thinking about it. I think that I read that last week, right, Caitlin? We were talking about that a little bit.
It
And
was
yeah, and I was like, that's interesting because
Wow.
the idea of Star Wars is no stranger to the concept of like a self-insert, and the question of who that is in the prequels, nothing
Mm.
had really fit for me. And then thinking about Qui-Gon as that person, I think is really interesting and something I haven't really like fully fleshed out, but I thought that was an interesting thought recently that I came across. And yeah, I echo everything Caitlin said about Padme, by the way, in terms of what characters stand. I don't think I can add anything new to that, but the character of Qui-Gon is someone who I think is the character that stands out, I think, in 2024 to me,
Yeah.
in the Phantom Menace.
I will say, just to that point, like, the thing that I always take away from Qui-Gon is, like, if we can take themes away from this movie that we can put into our everyday personal lives, right? His patience is just something that just is so powerful to me, right? Like, when he's there at the end, when in fighting Maul, and he's stuck in that like hallway with the shields around him, and he just lays down and starts to meditate, like, wow, what?
I know.
Who does that, right? Like, if I'm in a stressful situation at work, I'm just feeling overwhelmed. I'm taking all the hits as they come. Maybe I should center myself and sit down and just like, all right, everything's gonna be okay. And then just reassure myself, whatever happens, I am doing my best, and I know that it's gonna be okay. Right? Like, Qui-Gon's okay with whatever happens next in that sequence. If he goes down, he knows Obi-Wan's there to back him up, or he's trained him well enough that he can handle himself. And if he succeeds, then so be it, right? He's okay with whatever's going to happen next. And I think that's something that we can always take from Qui-Gon, and just for in that situation. But he's also such a proponent of the living force and living in the moment, being present in the moment, not being thinking about everything that's going on around us or in the future or in the past. He's like, no, center yourself on the here and now. And I think Qui-Gon is, that's brilliant that George kind of sees himself as Qui-Gon a little bit there.
So
I'll have to
Yeah.
like marinate with that one. That's
I know
so
it's
interesting.
definitely
Yeah.
one to marinate on. I can't say that I have fully thought like every aspect about that, but
Through
once
it,
I heard
yeah.
that, it was like, that's a new perspective
Yeah, it
25
really
years
is.
later that I haven't heard or thought enough about. And I think that's one of the joys of this movie, or any Star Wars movie, honestly.
It really is. That's a very juicy thought.
Yeah.
I will definitely have to sit on that one for a while.
Mhm.
That's a really great concept. Thank you for introducing that
Sure.
to me and in this episode too. So for our listeners, they can marinate on it as well. And Padme, she's awesome.
Awesome.
Right?
She's so great.
Let alone just being awesome. She is so great. That's right. Like, she's 14. Like a queen of a planet at 14.
An elected queen.
An elected
like,
queen
what?
at that. It's bonkers when you think about it. But she exhibits all the qualities of a leader at even such a young age, which again is perhaps another theme of this movie, is age doesn't matter if you have the wisdom and skill and you have the ability. Take charge, be a leader. Anakin's only 9 and he's doing this pod race that moves the plot forward in a tremendous way, right? Like, it doesn't matter all this stuff. That's all intangible things in the same regard. But Padme, she's connecting her planet in a way that's never been done before, right? As far as I know, have the Gungans and the people from the Naboo ever worked together in such a symbiotic way before? I mean, she gets them together in the ultimate crisis, which is incredible.
And Jar Jar too. Jar Jar did that too.
Jar Jar.
Yeah.
I mean,
They work
again,
together.
wonderful, great character. Ahmad Best is incredible.
Yes, absolutely.
So, from opinions I've heard over the years, the Anakin story in particular, the origin story itself, showcased within the movie, has been kind of divisive from people, whether it be him being 9 years old at the time, him being a slave on Tatooine, the Immaculate Birth, perhaps, of it all, introducing midichlorians at the same regards too. So what do you kind of make of Anakin's portrayal in this movie, as well as how the origins plays out? Charlotte, let's start with you on this one.
I'm glad that you mentioned the Immaculate Birth, because it's something I don't think about enough or at all, really, because I think it's the weirder aspect of Anakin's story, if I'm being completely honest.
It really is.
But it super is. I feel like I have, like, despite that and despite what I'm saying right now, I feel like the choice to show Anakin Skywalker as a 9-year-old kid with a lot of flaws, but with so much heart, I think was the best choice that George could possibly make. I think that maybe there could have been improvements along the way, but I definitely feel like it was the smartest thing to show the full arc of the 6-episode story, honestly. Starting at the point of total innocence and going to the fall from grace in Revenge of the Sith all the way to the original trilogy, I think is honestly the only choice. Like, I don't think that there was another way that that George could have done this effectively. And I also think that every time I watch it, I'm always astounded by sort of how young Anakin is. Like, he's a boy, and very much like youthful. Like, he's not like a tween at all. He is a kid. And I don't think that I don't know if that gets talked about enough, but I feel like there could have been a way that there's another movie in which George portrayed Anakin as like an angsty teen, but we didn't need that. We didn't need to start there. We got that basically in Attack of the Clones.
Oh, we
But
did.
yeah, yeah, we did. And I think that when we start more here with the fact that there's all these things that are riding against Anakin in his life, but he's still this optimistic young boy, you get a much better story arc from that beginning, I guess.
Yeah. Here. I second all that. That's wizard, as Kitster would say.
So wizard.
So wizard. Caitlin, where do you align on this thought process here?
Very similar to Charlotte. I think that when you think about the whole story of Anakin Skywalker, to be able to see him from essentially his origin story as such a young child all the way to his eventual death in Return of the Jedi, I think the saga of Anakin Skywalker becomes that much more powerful. Like Charlotte was mentioning, if we had, if the Phantom Menace was about a 15-year-old Anakin, that's a very different person. A 15-year-old who's grown up in slavery like he has on Tatooine, he's probably a lot more hardened, I would say, rightfully so. And I don't think that I just think it would have been a very different journey of Anakin. So I think it was so smart to, George knowing the ending of Anakin Skywalker, of the end of his death, it makes sense to bring us all the way back to the beginning of his childhood, of leaving his mother, of having, all the cards stacked against him, of kind of having no choice in a lot of the things that are going on in his life, but knowing that he has to get out at the same time. And I think it's really powerful. And I'll say too, I think for kids, George always talks about Star Wars as a movie for young people. And I think for kids to have a movie with a kid in it that's the main character is really important. Over the last year and a half, I was showing Star Wars to my nieces for the first time, and they're 8 and 7, and they really resonated with kid Anakin. And then to see that kid happen what happens in Revenge of the Sith, I think it's a lot more dramatic. I think you feel a lot more emotions for him, having known him as a child, to see what ends up happening to him in Revenge of the Sith, and then throughout the original trilogy too. So I think it's the best choice to have made Anakin so young in the Phantom Menace.
I agree. You're 100% right there on all fronts, both of you on this matter, I believe. I not only is it and I would say yes, anding what you just said there, Caitlin, is that not only is it the best choice, but it's probably, in my opinion, maybe one of the boldest choices of the Phantom Menace. Is I think the easy way out is to make him the 19-year-old that we see in Attack of the Clones and start right there. But way to subvert everyone's expectations in a way, and then just to say okay, well, no, fascists aren't born overnight in many ways, right? It is created over time via a myriad of influences on people and on outside factors, right? And Anakin is at this point, he just wants to do good for people. He sees he's lived through horrors. I don't know exactly, being a slave, what all that has done to him over his life to this point. But even not without having a father figure at that point too, this is the seeds are being laid here for the things that'll be taking place over the course of the next couple of episodes, as Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, Clone Wars even too, as we get more into that story there. And I think that's just so brilliant how George was I'm going to do this, right? He doesn't look back on that decision at all, right? In the beginning, you see them casting kids that same age, right? He was so in on this idea from the start, and I believe it too. And I think Jake Lloyd was a really great casting for this. And I'm glad that he's doing health wise, and that he's come around to Star Wars and all that. It's, him and Amma Best are probably some of the most unfortunate casualties of this film, to be honest, like, of how people have been treating them over the years, and the fact that Amma Best has come back into the Star Wars fold through the Mandalorian and the Jedi Adventure, not the Young Jedi. What was the YouTube show that
Challenge?
they did? Jedi Challenge. Yes, that's it. As Kylo Ren back and to bring him into the fold on that manner. And I hope that Jake Lloyd also has a chance to come back into Star Wars too in some way, shape, or form in the near future. But I think that, not to geek out a whole lot, but I did my senior thesis in college on Anakin's origin story and how that plays out for the rest of the story of Star Wars. And this is a really important one that, again, like I said, lays out the seeds for the rest of the story here. Everything that George did in this origin was very intentional, in my opinion. And it just kudos to George for having the foresight to do all this and to not let people to be like, this is a bad idea, and just be like, no, let him cook, let him see what's going to happen here.
Let him cook.
So I think it's really, really bold of him and awesome. Yeah, exactly. Let him cook. And speaking of cooking, John Williams, this man went off on this movie, in my opinion. He provides, he cooked a wonderful beef Wellington of a soundtrack for this movie. He provides a very, as George would say, a special sauce for this for the Star Wars saga. But he had such a hard task for this movie of bringing in some of the Star Wars themes from the original trilogy, but to create a whole new foundation for this new trilogy as well. So how do you think that John Williams handled that enormous task of creating this foundation for this film and to create that new language of music for this? Caitlin, what do you think about John Williams in this movie?
Oh my god. I don't even have a good response. He cooked. He did it. He did the thing. I don't think anyone would have had any doubt.
Where to start?
Right. I think he did such a masterful job. I think John Williams has talked about a lot the fact that he's been so blessed with Star Wars to have followed it for such a long time, to be able to really grow these motifs and things. And so I think it must have been really exciting, actually, to start with the Phantom Menace, to be in a world you've been in before, but in a completely different time, and to kind of build on that. And I think he did such an incredible job. And I think that Duel of the Fates is like, I mean, some of the top 10 tracks orchestrations that he's ever done, so I don't really have much else to say besides that. I think he just did an incredible job, like he always does. And the Phantom Menace is no different.
It reigns supreme. Were you both in the at Celebration Anaheim, the Lucasfilm Showcase panel? Did you both happen to be in that wonderful arena at the time?
Somehow we were, yes.
Somehow you made it into the arena. Perfect. So you both were witness to the choral when the lights dropped, and then they bring out the opening choral for the Duel of the Fates. I mean, I'm getting goosebumps now just thinking about it.
It was the coolest thing ever.
It really was. It really was.
What you were there?
I was, yes, very fortunate to won the lottery to get in there. Like, I was like the icing on the cake for the entire weekend. Right, I could have done nothing else. Frankly, in that whole panel, if they'd have just done nothing but do that Duel of the Fates choral panel, I would have been okay. Like, all right, we're good. We got our money's worth.
Totally agree.
Let alone what else would happen that whole day. But I'm glad that you both were there to witness greatness in person.
Yeah, it was awesome. One thing I just want to add about the music, I do feel like the choice to put Anakin's theme. Okay, I'm gonna get this wrong, and if I do, stop me. Anakin's theme is interchanged with the Emperor's theme, or is that
Imperial March?
Imperial March. Okay, yeah. So it's like it's all so brilliantly woven in between. Oh, I'm thinking about
You're thinking about the other one. Yep.
Yes, the marching song at the end that is from Naboo. It is the Emperor's theme, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, both of those are amazing examples of like absolute brilliance of John Williams taking this task and just executing it on the most like hinty way that they could possibly do. Without being super overt, because being super overt wasn't George Lucas's goal really with this movie. But John Williams was able to show or hint and foreshadow at the progression of Anakin through the music that was so well done. It was just so perfect.
Yeah.
I think about their conversations, like George and John, about that kind of stuff, and to have been a fly on a wall in
Oh,
conversations like that
so
of George
cool.
explaining, you know, is he explaining what he wants, that he wants the music to do these kinds of things? Is John just interpreting it all and creating these
Mhm.
masterpieces from his interpretation? I don't know.
Yeah.
It would have been incredible to kind of hear more about their dynamic and their working relationship.
That's so true. Yeah. I need that documentary. Where's that behind the scenes footage? Where
Right?
I know that in the beginning you see a little bit of the recording of the soundtrack, but to actually be in the like, okay, well, this is what this scene is and this is what this is implying and all that stuff. Yeah, I wonder how much they like maybe George laid out like the grand plans for him a little bit in some way to give him like a sense of where it's all going, perhaps. I mean, he knew where it was going in a way, but
Yeah.
like how much was interwoven? How much did he know? That'd be so fascinating to find out. Oh, we
Well,
got to
the
get
thing
John
is,
Williams on the phone.
yeah, the thing that's interesting is that when I was going through all those behind the scenes clips, like Rick McCallum was very open about like, oh no, this is just the beginning. You guys,
Mhm.
we'll get there. But like you, sorry about the sirens, but
All good.
oh, I completely lost the train of my thought
Rick,
because
Rick,
of
Rick McCallum
Rick
going back to the
McCallum.
beginning.
Yes,
Yeah.
Rick McCallum really was very much into the fact that like any question that he had was very much like, no, we're getting there. Like
Hmm.
you, this is the beginning of the story, and we're gonna see that. I'm not going to tell you that much about it, but I think it's very clear, like when you go back, that people knew what we were heading towards. George was super open about in Revenge of the Sith, like we're gonna have a lava planet, and this is what it's gonna be
Yeah.
like, and many things changed from the Phantom Menace era to Revenge of the Sith era, but I think that I think he was really open about at least the essence of his vision about how we got there.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. That is so true. That is so true. And the Rick McCallum of it all is just wonderful. Like that man is. I go back to watching those like the beginning documentary and all that stuff, and I'm like, man, like, or even Empire Dreams, and you're like, Gary Kurtz is like, he seems to be like a nice, kind man producer behind the scenes, whereas Rick McCallum's getting on the phone with Ewan McGregor. He's like, dude, this is where we're starting at. This is gonna be great.
It's the best. It's
It
like
really
it's so
is.
so wacky.
He's
100%.
incredible.
And this man's working on Young Indy too, which I've been doing a whole deep dive on. Rick McCallum, like, where's he? What's he doing these days? I need a book on this man. I've
God, I wish I
actually,
knew. He lives in like Germany or
yeah,
something,
he's over
right?
in like Eastern Europe or something like that, just
Yeah.
like living his life, doing something out there.
Doing
Rick
something.
McCalluming it up. Yeah, whatever he's doing out there. I think this first off, the soundtrack has like a thing that will never happen again in the history of cinema, where it was released before the movie and
Oh,
then had
yeah.
the title being Qui-Gon's Noble End on the one track. And it's like, man, because of that and because of the time they released it now, I'm blaming that for why we get such bland titles for musical soundtrack arrangements, right? It'll be like, Cornfield Chase or something like it, Portals, right?
Cornfield Chase.
Nothing makes any sense. It's just so bland and not,
Mhm.
you're just like, come on. I wish they, a lot of these musical artists could go back after the movie comes out and then retitle them the way that they probably wanted them to be. But that's just a little gripe that I got from this instance here. But John Williams, he sets the stage here. I think like the flag parade from the beginning of the pod race is such a cool opening sequence.
Yeah.
I mean, Duel of Fates is absolutely mind-boggling. The fact that it had a music video that was super popular on MTV at the time, Total Request Live, a 1999 fixture. It had regular rotation on that. I know Silver's got a VHS of someone recorded the
Of
TRL when
course,
it
of
came out. So I'm like,
course.
that's the holy grail you've got in your collection there, Silver. And Augie's Municipal Band. I mean, like, how brilliant of John Williams at the end of the day to make the Emperor's theme like a marching band celebratory thing at the end of all things, right? Like, it just goes to show again, like the Phantom Menace, the real winner of this movie is not anybody. It's Palpatine, right? This man is he's the only one that gained something out of all this, right? People died, people lost their homes, struggle and strife happened throughout. We think we're watching a celebratory victory for our heroes, but in reality, the only one that moved their plot forward in many ways is Palpatine, who's now Chancellor, and the Clone Wars are just 10 years away, and then the Empire is coming. And again, I wonder how much John Williams knew, how much he knew. Because I didn't know at the time. Me and my friends were like, what's the Sidious guy? He's interesting. He probably has nothing to do with that Emperor guy. We had full conversations about this. We didn't even think that Palpatine was anywhere close to being the guy under the hood, right? We had no idea what was going on with this. So it was just, for me at least, it was a fun time to just be an innocent Star Wars fan and speculate responsibly on everything.
I speculate responsibly.
So this movie's got a ton of speculate responsibly, indeed. Yes. This got the pod race, the duel with Maul. I actually think the opening fight sequence is really cool with like when the gas subsides and the droidicas come out and all that. I think that's pretty bonkers and awesome. So these are just a few of the incredible action sequences of the film. And I was just curious, which are some of the standouts for you? And perhaps there's others too that you can pull from here on this front. Charlotte, do you have any fun action sequences that you like?
Despite me not loving the pod race when I was young, I still think the pod race is the most outstanding piece of action in the Phantom Menace, honestly. I think the lightsaber battle is amazing, mainly due to the score, if I'm being honest. But I think with the absence of the score in the pod race, I think it makes it so much cooler. And it's just like classic George Lucas wanting to do a super cool race, and he nailed it. So I think for me, the biggest standout is the pod race for this movie.
I like it. Faster, more intense, as George would say. This is definitely American Graffiti and his love of racing all in one. And the pod race rocks. It still stands to this day. Caitlin, where do you land on the action sequences of this movie? Any favorites, standouts for you?
It's pretty basic, but Duel of the Fates. I love the whole sequence. My particular favorite moment is when they're on all of the walkways with no handrails. I don't know the proper term for that area, but when they're on all the different levels and things like that, that's my favorite part.
Hey, we'll take it.
I just think it's so well done, and I'm kind of on the edge of my seat every time I watch it.
I wonder what they would call that. I know the Empire definitely doesn't believe in handrails. But Naboo, why do they not have handrails there? It doesn't. I'm sure George has a reason for it canonically, and probably production wise there is a reason for it too, which may supersede the reason why there wasn't anything. But I don't know. It plays for in I don't know if you've played the Lego Skywalker Saga game, but it does make for a great level in that game too. When you're like, well, how can we reinvent the Duel of the Fates sequence? And they really did with that fun little foray there into the Maul battle. I love that sequence too. The pod race is awesome. I just learned, I had my mind blown the last couple of weeks there that in the DVD and VHS release, there was a special edition already where it was a longer pod race sequence. I had no idea about this.
Me neither.
Exactly. So in the theaters, what you got pulled out from in 1999, it was about a minute and a half shorter of a pod race sequence. And then with the subsequent VHS and DVD releases, they expanded it out to the full minute and 30 seconds there.
Maybe I did know this because didn't they include like some of the families and things like that? Or was that like technically even more deleted?
I honestly, I couldn't even tell you what it wasn't there and what is there. I just, our friends at Blast Points did an episode on this a few weeks ago, and I just sat there just being like, what? My whole life is a lie. Everything I've known to this point is ruined.
I haven't caught that one, but they are, if they do everything well, but what they do well is going through the differences in the sounds and like different cuts that have come out in the theaters. And it blows my mind every single time.
So fun fact for all of us here is that perhaps this time, maybe there'll be even a longer, maybe this will be a really specialized edition of the Phantom Menace. Who knows? I mean, this will be my first time, frankly, seeing Yoda not puppet, which is kind of wild to think about.
Yeah.
I got so used to seeing puppet Yoda that it's kind of jarring for me to not see him as a puppet anymore. So who knows? Maybe we'll get a little more Phantom Menace goodness in this new re-release here. Probably not, but you never know. George can always throw a McClunky in here or there that has been laying in wait for all these years.
Oh my gosh, there's nothing funnier to me than the McClunky of it all. It's like it's the funniest thing ever.
When in doubt, McClunky. That's what I
So
always say.
true. So true.
So this movie presents a ton of different themes, and I will say, like, what I always take away from Star Wars is that it's a film for 12-year-olds, and it's a film for the 12-year-old in all of us. That we see these people play in the space fantasy opera. They put themselves in situations that they learn lessons and see how things go, and it's a safe way for us as the audience to see them making choices and living out those choices, so that we can take what they, it's a safe way for us to see what we could do in those situations too, and then bring that into our daily lives. And I think this movie has a ton of great themes that we can extrapolate from to make us better people overall at the end of the day. Charlotte, what are some of the themes that you perhaps take away from this movie as you watched it over the last 25 years?
For sure. I think that for me, Phantom Menace is all about letting go,
I love
and
that.
leaving home, and how important it is to
Yeah.
take that step. It's the same step that Luke Skywalker takes in A New Hope, but it's deeper when Anakin takes it, and darker, honestly. But I think
Yeah.
that him taking that leap of faith, of hope, and honestly Shmi's sacrifice too, there, of wanting a better life for Anakin, her son.
Yeah.
I think the whole, like, be brave and don't turn back, or don't look back, I feel like that to me is the most, as I get older, that scene, like, is way more meaningful for me, and I think
Yeah.
that it gets deeper when you get older. And I think for me, I feel like the Phantom Menace does the crossing the threshold experience of, like, leaving home, better than A New Hope, honestly. And I think that is what I take away from the Phantom Menace, I guess, into my daily life, and is just that experience of making a change, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And the courage of Shmi Skywalker is something that you really could extrapolate from this movie too, in many
Yeah.
ways. That, like, to have the foresight to be like, they're going to give my son a better life than I possibly ever could, given the current situation. Like, he's a slave right now. I'm a slave too. We're probably never getting out of this. He has an opportunity to go out and see the world and do something better. And I trust these people enough. We've had dinners together. I had my mom was a single parent too. So, like, as the older I get, I really connect to this, like, courageous nature that she must have had in order to say, like, yeah, I'm going to let go, because that is loving, right? To love my son in this way and to let him have a greater life for himself is to let him go and to let him live his life and be free and all of that. So, like, Shmi Skywalker really sets the tone. She is the heart in many ways of the Skywalker saga. To be like, letting go is to love, and to care is to love, and to let people blossom and grow. And they're never really gone. They're in our hearts, but they have to go and experience their own journey. And Shmi is at the heart of all of that.
Totally.
Caitlin, what are the themes that you pull away from this movie as you've watched it over the last 20 years now?
I think the one thing I really come back to with Phantom Menace is the idea of fate and destiny. It is kind of, honestly, a lot of what I think
Ooh,
about
that's
now
great.
is that that whole kind of dialogue from Dave Filoni in The Mandalorian, The Gallery, season 1, where he talks about the duel of the fates
Oh
and
yeah.
the fate of Anakin as this child and how it sets off this chain of events. And I think I think the way that he described the Phantom Menace in that whole conversation, that roundtable, just really kind of blew my mind. And he said it so succinctly and perfectly. But I think that's often what I come back to with the Phantom Menace is
Yeah.
just kind of what we were talking about earlier with the genius of having Anakin be this child in the film, but the ripple effect of this duel of the fates and what's going to happen to Anakin and the choices that all these adults are making around him and how that's going to have such drastic impacts on the galaxy as a whole, and the way that George kind of contained that within the film, but then also within the duel of the fates itself, and like who ends up winning that battle is going to determine so much for Anakin and the galaxy. And I think that the Phantom Menace does, it's so ominous, so much foreboding, so much foreshadowing in it that I think is so fun as a viewer to get to see what George was seeding in this, number 1 film in episode 1 that we can track throughout the rest of the saga, really up through episode 6, really. But yeah, I love that.
Yeah, Caitlin, you're 100% right when it comes to all this, right? Like, this film is structurally so important to everything that comes out afterwards, and it could be just still to just that action sequence there, right, where it's like
Yeah.
Anakin's fate hangs in the balance here, but over the course of the entire movie too, there's a lot of choices and decisions that could have been made along the way to influence that whatsoever, right? Dave Filoni does a great job in the gallery, kind of extrapolating his monologue there. Most Star Wars fans at this point have probably seen it. If you haven't, go check it out on Disney Plus. You will not regret it. It's a great 5-minute watch for you there.
It really
But
is the best ever. I just gotta say, it
yeah,
really,
yeah.
it really is. I haven't. It's been a little bit since I've seen it, and after we talk, I'm gonna go watch it again.
It's worth a rewatch. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And to your point there too, Caitlin, it's like, I think what you just said there is why this movie is structurally so important to understanding Star Wars itself. And I'm sure you both have heard over the years, people are like, oh, you can just skip the Phantom Menace, right? You do 1, 4, 5, you do 2, 3, or something like that, or whatever order you watch. And people are always like, no, you can cut out the Phantom Menace. And every time I like slam my fist on the table, like, you cannot do that.
Oh my God, Anthony, you're talking to the right people about this, because
Right?
Caitlin and I, in our first year of podcasting, we did we did an episode or several episodes about the machete order, and we were
Okay,
like,
yeah.
no, the machete order is not the best situation. You have to include, like, we like the machete order, but the machete order cannot exist without the Phantom Menace. And so, like, we were like,
Yeah.
the Skytalkers machete order, it's much better. And we incorporated the Phantom Menace into it, because that doesn't make sense to skip it. It's not right. It's just not right.
It isn't. It isn't right at all. It blows my mind that people could just cut out an aspect of a Star Wars movie, especially in Episode 1, right? Like, you're cutting off arguably like some of the most important pieces of this overarching story, right? The way that George conceived it, like we talked about at the beginning, right? Charlotte, you were like, you have to watch 1 through 6, right? George was very adamant about that, right? And if you cut off that beginning there, you miss out on so much of the inner workings that he was trying to present there. So you're cutting off at that time, what, 20, almost 20% of the story in many ways. And
Crazy.
I can't believe that people did that. I can't believe people still do that to this day.
So
It blows
rude.
my mind. It is so rude.
It's so rude.
So I'm at my last question here for you both, and I want to talk about kind of like the future of the Phantom Menace in some way. So Caitlin, starting with you here, how do you think the Phantom Menace continues to inspire and affect new Star Wars stories as we go into the future then?
That's a good question. I think number one, the Phantom Menace will continue, honestly, to have kind of a similar trajectory as mine with larger audiences, is people just kind of understanding that film more and having more of an appreciation for it. I think we were talking about kind of the
Yeah.
energy around this re-release and how that's different now than it was in 2013. And I think, a lot of the prequel kids are a lot older now too. So there's this excitement of showing it to their kids. You know what I mean? So I think there's that kind of different energy around it too. But I think as far as inspiration for future Star Wars stories and Star Wars films, I think that kind of Duel of the Fates mentality of that destiny aspect of it, I would love to see kind of fully explored in kind of another set of stories, not a standalone. This idea of something happening in the beginning of a character's story, kind of having this unraveling ripple effect down the line. I kind of think we could see something like that in The Acolyte, but I love that kind of ominous tone that the Phantom Menace can have. And so I think I would like to see some more of that in future Star Wars stories too.
Wow, that'd be great. That'd be great. Like, oh man, could you imagine if they extrapolate on that more? That'd be so wild. I mean, just like, the Acolyte would be a perfect place for that, and many things the Acolyte could be a perfect place for too, like bringing back, like maybe explaining a bit more the Chosen One prophecy and where the origin of that comes from, and maybe just someone's just like sneakily is like, yes, the Chosen One prophecy. I mean, maybe that comes into play a little bit here. That then, because Leslie Headland has been unapologetic about her love of the Phantom Menace, which I big supporter of. Like,
It's so awesome.
Wave the flag. Exactly.
I know. It's the first time. Have we ever had, besides Dave Filoni, have we ever had a creator who has sort of led with that? I think we got it out of Rian Johnson.
Yep.
But it was not a leading situation, right? It was not I grew up with the prequels and I love the prequels. And I feel like this is the first time that we're getting that, which is so awesome. And I wish more people were as obsessed with that as we all are.
Exactly. The wave is coming. The wave is coming. We got, people are in film school right now. They're getting their jobs. They're working their way up. They're doing the indie thing. They're figuring out how to make films in the studio system. And now they're coming up to the forefront. We're finally getting this new wave of filmmakers that are going to be all in on the Phantom Menace and the prequel trilogy. I can't wait for like 10 years from now when people are like citing like Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith as big influences on them. Like I'm gonna cry tears of happiness. I'm like, I won all those years of defending these movies. I win.
Totally. I think it's already happening. I don't know if you follow like the Letterboxd videos. That the Letterboxd is an app where you can review movies. I'm sure you know that, but if people listening don't know, and they do a lot of videos where they interview celebrities and actors and creators, and I have seen Revenge of the Sith be mentioned like 4 times in the past 2 months. And that was never a thing before. It was just never a thing. And so it's already happening and it's very exciting.
It's a great time to be a Star Wars fan, especially if you like these series of films and the stuff that they've been doing since, which, we're fans. We're fans,
Yeah.
We're there their opening night. Like you don't have to haggle us to get in there or anything like that. So we're truly living in the best timeline when it comes to this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Charlotte, do you have any hopes, wishes, and like thoughts on where the Phantom Menace will go in the future as it continues to inspire stories?
I think Caitlin really summed it up.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was a boldness in the special effects in the story itself that I hope continues to inspire Star Wars creators, honestly, specifically, and sort of the unapologetic nature of, no, this is the story we're telling and this is how we're going to get there. I feel like that is the energy I want forward in future Star Wars movies and television shows and things. And I think, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I think it does, but I think that I want that part of the Phantom Menace to continue to inspire people.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I agree. And here's to a new wave of fans, hopefully going into this re-release experience, watching the movie, getting so inspired to create their own stories, and going home and just playing with their, going out and buying action figures, getting the Amidala and Jar Jar and all these characters that are so wonderful and just very impactful on my life. But I hope that a whole new generation of kids see this movie and create a whole new level of appreciation for it, and they run home, beg their parents to turn on Disney Plus and watch the Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, and just create a whole new wave of Star Wars fans. I think it'd be awesome.
Me too.
Yeah, it'd be so great.
I agree. Well, that is all the questions that I had for you both here. I want to thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and for really diving deep into this movie and just geeking out about it in one way, but also there's so much about this movie that has impacted all of our lives, clearly, and it's wonderful to hear your stories personally and just to chat about how this movie has been so impactful, both over 25 years from humble beginnings of being taken out of the movie theater or seeing this movie for the first time on a couch. It's just, this movie continues to have wonderful memories for all of us. And I hope that as we go into the theater, and people have gone to the theater, hopefully, as they're listening to this, they can create new memories for themselves and in the Star Wars galaxy. So thank you, first and foremost, for doing that. Let's start with Caitlin. Where can the fine folks find you online, and Skytalkers if they want to? Hopefully they're already listening to your podcast, because it's been quite an inspiration for me over the last several years here. The work that you both do is incredible, so I hope that people are already listening. But where can they find you on the internet if they want to continue the conversation and learn more about the Phantom Menace and your love of Star Wars overall?
Oh, well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for having us on. This was honestly so much fun to dive into the Phantom Menace with you. You can find me on Twitter, X, at Caitlin Plusher. That's probably the best place to find me. I'm on Instagram, but I don't post there very often, sadly. But you can find Skytalkers on Twitter as well, at Skytalkers Pod, or our TikTok or Instagram. We post there quite a bit, so we're definitely active there. And you can find our podcast on any podcast platform of choice. So we're really excited to be talking about the Phantom Menace with you and everything coming up in the next couple of weeks, because there's a lot of Star Wars stuff coming up here around May the 4th. So we will be busy over on Skytalkers.
Oh yeah, Tales of the Empire, The Acolyte. This is a great time to be a Star Wars fan, and just any one of those ways would be incredible. But the fact that we get both, it's like, what a great buffet we've got going on right now. Charlotte,
This,
yeah, how can they get involved in finding you on the social medias and all that stuff?
this particular, I have to say, this particular time of the year is always so filled with amazing Star Wars stuff. We're so lucky. Phantom Menace in theater, Acolytes right around the corner, Tales of the Empire, Bad Batch ending. Like,
I
there's
forgot.
so
Yes.
much. There's so much. But you can find me. My screen name on all platforms is Crerity, Crerrity. And yeah, we're always posting from our Skytalkers accounts on TikTok and on Instagram. So definitely follow us there and listen wherever you get your podcasts. We're going to be talking about the Phantom Menace on our channel too. So we'll get there eventually. probably something's up when you're listening to this, but it's sort of unplanned. So we don't know. I'm saying too much. I got to stop talking.
Amazing. You're giving our listeners a little bit in the behind the scenes lookout. So you're giving them a tease for something that's coming. And I love it. I love it. We got scoops going on galore here at Force Ghost Conversations. And I'm glad you brought up Bad Batch, because I'd be remiss if we concluded this conversation without bringing up the fact that they said the word midichlorian in the Bad Batch, which, if you'd have told me Asajj Ventress would be the next person in Star Wars to say the word midichlorian, I've been like, you're crazy. What are you talking about?
God,
that girl from the 2003 Tartakovsky miniseries, right? Like, Anakin ended her and shoved her down a cliff. Like, that's not possible at all. But I feel like I never felt more vindicated in my life than when she said the word midichlorian in the most casual way possible.
It was awesome. It was so awesome.
It was quite a blast. And I hope that everyone listening to this podcast too had a blast. And I hope you've been really enjoying the Phantom Menace conversations that we've been doing here on the podcast over the last couple of weeks. So thanks again to Charlotte and Caitlin for coming on the show and for geeking out all things Phantom Menace. And if you want to continue the conversation with us here at Force Ghost Conversations, you can find us on all the social media platforms: Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Hive. Just search Force Ghost Conversations and we'll be there in some way, shape, or form, and we'll continue the conversation with you there. And we'll be back next week with a brand new episode with something in the Star Wars galaxy. I don't know exactly what yet, but we'll figure it out. And trust me, it'll be great. So until then, folks, may the Force be with you, and take care.